Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Ho Center for Buddhist Studies at Stanford, let me welcome you to this event in the TT and WF Chao Buddhist Art and Film series. It's fair to say that the last few decades have seen a kind of gold rush in the discovery of and research into manuscripts, coins and images found in the area we know as Greater Gandhara and in South Asia more generally. And no name has been more prominent in that general field than that of our guest this evening. Professor Osmund Bopearachchi has made his considerable reputation in the linked fields of numismatics, so literal gold, yes, archaeology and art history, not only with a very large number of publications, including 17 books authored or co-authored, but also by his leadership as director of the French Sri Lankan Archaeological Mission and his involvement in many other projects besides. Trained at the University of Kelaniya in his native Sri Lanka and then at the Sorbonne in Paris, Professor Bopearachchi has held visiting positions at Harvard, Lille, the École du Louvre, Yale, and repeatedly at UC Berkeley, where he is currently the Numata Visiting Professor in Buddhist Studies. This has made him a frequent visitor to the Bay Area and therefore so well known to almost all of you that this introduction is more or less unnecessary. Professor Bopearachchi is also the recipient of many awards for his work in France, in India, in the United Kingdom, and in Greece, including most recently his election to the French Academy of Inscriptions and Belles-Lettres as a corresponding member, one of the highest honours to which an academic in France might aspire. This most prestigious award was announced on March the 10th, less than 2 weeks ago, and we congratulate him on it. Now, all that might suggest a rather august and forbidding personage, an academic giant, a proud denizen of the academic stratosphere, like the gods of Akanishta. So I'm happy to confirm that Professor Bopearachchi is one of the most amiable and unassuming people I know, a frequent visitor to our centre here, and one whom we are always happy to see and hang out with. As I invite him to present his lecture on the Yamakaprātihārya, or the twin miracle, please join me in welcoming him here again tonight.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the kind words about me. So I wish to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Paul Harrison, George Wedwin Brunel Professor of Religious Studies, and Dr. Irene H. Lin, Executive Director of the Ho Center for Buddhist Studies at Stanford, for inviting me to give this talk and for their warm welcome. I'm very happy to be here for the second time to give a talk, but I have been here many times. I also wish to thank Stephanie Lee, Finance Associate, for unfolding help, and Leah Grifalda, Office and Events Coordinator of the Ho Center for Buddhist Studies at Stanford, for looking after the logistics. It is a great pleasure to be at Stanford once again with friends and colleagues. The designation Yamakaprātihārya differs in different texts. The Pali commentaries generally refer to the Buddha's simultaneous emission of the contradictory elements of fire and water as the twin miracle. In the Sanskrit tradition, in addition to the emission of fire and water, it also denotes the Buddha's aerial display of the 4 types of noble bearing: walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. Alfred Fouché was the first to draw our attention to the miracle of Sravasti. As we shall see later, Fouché misinterpreted the Muhammad Nari sculpture as the miracle of Sravasti. Since then, many renowned art historians have discussed the relationship between textual narratives and iconographies, and among them, Jules Henry occupies a prominent place, which was his doctoral thesis at Berkeley. Following his analysis of the text, several scholars have made important contributions, including David Fiordalis, Andy Rothman, Nacho Paul Sirsivard from Munich, Harry Falk, and Elisabeth Steinbruckner. The Buddha performed different types of miracles in different places and different occasions. According to Sravasthavadin and Mula Sravasthavadins, the Buddha performed Yamakaprātihārya at Gaya Sirasa, Kapilavastu, Rajagriha, and Sravasti. In my talk today, I will focus mainly on the Yamakaprātihārya of Kapilavastu and Sravasti. According to the Pali Nidahana Katha, composed most probably in the 5th or the 6th century in Sri Lanka, the first attested twin miracle was performed during the first week after his enlightenment. Siddhartha Gautama had to perform this miracle to appease the doubts of the gods who were concerned that he was showing no signs of his great achievement. It is represented in Sri Lanka, but not as twin miracle, as Nidahana Katha claims. The mural of the Purvarama Vihara in Katuluwa in southern Sri Lanka, dated to 1886, is a good example. The Blessed One ascends high into the sky just after his awakening to assume his divine friends of his Buddhahood. The gods emerging from clouds to witness the Buddha's miracle seem satisfied. However, neither the water nor the fire emanating from his body are shown. There are two major versions of the twin miracle at Sravasti, varying to some degree in Pali and Sanskrit text. The longest Pali account of the miracle is found in the Dhammapada Atthakatha. The Sanskrit version in the Pratihārya Sutra of the Divyavadana also has detailed description of the miracle. However, as we shall see later, some important events related in the Pali text are not mentioned in the Pratihārya Sutra. The events related to the twin miracle at Sravasti are narrated in the following chronological order by Buddhaghosha in his commentary of the Dhammapada. The twin miracle, or Yamakaprātihārya, was performed in a miracle contest between Gautama Buddha and 6 rival heretics who meet King Bimbisara of Magadha and ask him to sponsor the contest. The Buddha declares that he will perform the miracle at the foot of a mango tree in Sravasti on the full moon day of Vaisala Puja in 4 months' time. The desperate heretics, to avoid the contest, uproot all the mango trees in the area before the miracle contest. On the day of the competition, the Buddha eats a mango offered by a royal gardener and plants the seed in front of the city gate. As soon as he washes his hands over the area, a full mango tree immediately grows. The Buddha begins the miracle by creating a jewel walkway in the air and prepares to perform the miracle in front of the crowd of observers. The Buddha performs the miracle as he walks up and down the jewel walkway. Standing at the top of the jewel walkway, the Buddha enters a state of meditation and emits fire from the upper half of the body and jets of water from the lower half, and then begins to alternate fire and water between positions all around his body, creating 6-colored display. After the twin miracle, Buddha is said to have ascended to the heaven of the 33 gods for 3 months and a week to spend the rainy retreat and expound the Abhidhamma Pitaka to his mother and the other gods residing in the heaven. The Pali tradition seemed to make a point of saying that the ascent and the descent always follow the Sravasti miracle. The Blessed One then decides to descend to the city of Samkasha from the paradise of Trayatimsa using the triple ladders created by Vishwakarma, the heavenly architect. The oldest extant sculptural depiction of the twin miracle, usually dated to the 2nd or the 1st century BCE, is found at Bharuch Stupa. An epigraph on the gateway of the stupa mentions its erection during the supremacy of the Sungas, 2nd or the 1st century BC. What Alexander Cunningham considered to be the throne of the four Buddhas, thrones of the Buddhas, in reality symbolize, as correctly suggested by John Marshall and Alfred Fouché, the jewel walkway in the air created by the Blessed One. The presence of the other three events, inseparably linked to the twin miracle, are carved in the Ajasatru pillar. From top to bottom, they are the Buddha preaching to the gods in Triatimsa heaven, the Buddha's descent to Samkasya from the Triatimsa, and finally the Blessed One residing in the garden where he miraculously sprouted a mango tree and where the miracle was performed. Similarly, the miracle of the mango tree, the twin miracle, and the descent to Samkasya coincide with the narrative of the Dhammapada Katha. Northern gateway or the Torana of the Great Sanchi Stupa, known as Stupa number 1, brings to light several episodes connected with the subsequent twin miracle at Sravasti as narrated in Dhammapada Katha. Although the carvings of the Great Sanchi Stupa, like the ones of the Bharuch Stupa, do not follow a sequential pattern, most of the events narrated in the Pali commentary on the Dhammapada are grouped on the two pillars of the northern gateway. The royal procession on the second panel of the inner side of the east pillar most likely depicts King Bimbisara accompanied by musicians playing drums and flutes leaving Rajagriha to meet the Buddha. The panel below depicts the Bimbisara's visit to Buddha at Venuvana, as indicated by the bamboo grove in the background. On the front of the east pillar unfold 4 events directly highlighting Sravasti and its neighboring area as described in Dhammapada Katha. A panel immediately below the jewel walkway scene may depict King Prasannajit leaving the city of Sravasti to announce the heretics' challenge to the Buddha. Mounted on his horse, the king rides out in a great pomp in a procession preceded by musicians while his royal entourage watches from the balconies. The panel at the top clearly indicates that the miracle of the mango tree that the Blessed One performed at Sravasti. The well-carved mangoes, I painted them. All the panels were painted in the past, but I did this for you. Okay, the well-carved mangoes on the tree and the gods happily playing massive drums put the event into context. However, the Divyavadana does not mention the miracle of the mango tree or the uprooting of the mango trees before the miracle. The panel below, with its vivid evocation of the Jetavana monastery offered to the Buddha by Anathapindika, placed the next event, which is the twin miracle in the vicinity of Sravasti. This panel depicts the Buddha's 3 favorite residents at the Jetavana monastery with punchmark coins laid on the ground. The Tibetan translation of the Mula Sravasthavadi Vinaya clearly says that the great miracle was performed at the midpoint between Sravasti and the Jetavana grove. The jewel walkway in the air indicates to the viewer, despite the absence of anthropomorphic image of the Buddha, that the miracle is taking place in front of the kings and nobles who visited it, or who witnessed it. It is important to remember there that Dhammapada Katha alone mentions that the jewel walkway in the air. It clearly says, quote, "The miracle therefore the teacher performed as he walked up and down the jewel walkway." Quotation ends. With reference to the narration of the Dhammapada-Atthakatha, the next miracle, the descent of the Buddha from the heaven of 33 gods, is depicted on the front of the west pillar. It is the Pali tradition represented by the Dhammapada-Atthakatha that is faithfully respected in the sculptural program of the Bharut and Sanchi stupas. As I have argued elsewhere, before the advent of Sanskritization, there were certainly texts in Gandhari, Magadhi, Elu and many other vernacular languages narrating the stories of the Buddha's life, including the 7 weeks after his enlightenment, the twin miracle, and the descent from the heaven of the 33 gods. As wisely observed by my good friend Richard Solomon, quote, "It is no exaggeration to say that we are living and working in a golden age of Buddhist studies, and there is every reason to hope that this golden age will continue for many years to come." Quotation ends. It is in this context that we are able to understand the importance of the so-called split collection of Gandhari texts recently published by Harry Falk and Elizabeth Steinbruckner, recounting the Sravasti miracle. Dated to the 1st century CE, it is the earliest preserved literary form of this narrative. Most of the Gandharan sculptures depicting the twin miracle of Shakyamuni are found in isolation. In the absence of the extended context in which they are embedded, we cannot determine precisely to which city, either to Sravasti or to Kapilavastu, they allude. However, the iconography of a few Gandharan sculptures evokes, without doubt, the miracle displayed at Sravasti. A sculpture in a private collection in Japan depicts 6 ascetics in Anjali Mudra, often described as a gesture of worship or veneration or greetings, but here signifying begging for forgiveness from the Buddha. They are the 6 heretics led by Purana Kashyapa, who challenged the Buddha to a competition to display miracles and ultimately, ashamed and embarrassed, hung their heads, witnessing the magical power of the Blessed One. With timely publication of another sculpture, previously unpublished, Pierre Brancaccio suggests that the story of the Buddha meeting with the naked ascetic, Patikaputta, related to the Patika Suttanta in the Digha Nikaya is depicted. In this episode, narrated in the Digha Nikaya, Buddha's miracle is limited to rising into the air. I quote, "To the height of 7 palm trees and projecting a beam for the height of another 7 so that it blazed and shed fragrance." Quotation ends. Thus, the elements of water and fire seen projecting from the Buddha's body in the sculpture not mentioned in the episode recounted in the Digha Nikaya. This sculpture may rather depict the twin miracle and Vajrapani punishing Purana Kashyapa. The Tibetan Mula Sravasthavadi Vinaya narrates that Vajrapani, the Yaksha, had thought, quote, "Since these stupid people will assail the Blessed One for a long time, I will employ methods to make them all run away." Quotation ends. Another Gandharan sculpture, unfortunately fragmented, depicts the Yaksha Vajrapani attacking the heretic with his thunderbolt, while the Buddha performs a miracle emitting fire and water. Colored xylography on canvas dated to the 19th century from the eastern Tibet, now in the Paris Musée Guimet, vividly illustrates how Panchika, the great general, the Mahasenapati of the Yakshas, unleashed a violent storm that annihilated the pavilion reserved for the heretics, who dispersed in greatest confusion. It also depicts, following the narration in the Tibetan Mula Sravasthavadi Vinaya, how Vajrapani sent heavy winds and rain such that the miracle pavilion did not come into the path of their sight. Some, out of fright, entered mountain caves, and some went into deep grasses, and some into dense forest, and some entered nearby buildings, and some went into temples. Quotation ends. The Divyavadana and the Tibetan Mūlasravasthavādi Vinaya clearly state that the Buddha displayed 4 types of noble bearing in the sky, that is walking, standing, sitting and lying down. The Gandharan reliefs known to date depict only the standing and sitting Buddhas, and none of them show Buddhas walking and reclining positions. The recently published Gandhari manuscript, which is the oldest known text referring to the miracle at Sravasti, published by Falk and Steinbruckner, does not mention 4 types of noble bearing, but it only says that Buddha stood there in the sky with many duplicates into millions. 5th century sculptures and paintings, adding to the already attested repertoire of standing and seated postures in early forms of visual art, include the Buddha's walking position in the sky. We are certain that the painting in Ajanta cave number 17 of the Twin Miracle, where the Buddha is depicted in standing, sitting and walking poses, display the event at Sravasti owing to the presence of humiliated heretics. The best example of sitting, standing, walking and reclining positions is found in the large stone relief at Vachin in Ayodhya, dated to the 7th or 8th century at Dwarvati period, as correctly observed by Robert Brown, quote, "At the bottom of the stele, on either side of the Buddha, are the 2 groups of earthly participants. On the right are the 6 heretics teachers with their plump leader, Puranakashyapa, while on the opposite side, King Prasannajit, his hands in Anjali Mudra with his retinue." End of quotation. The 19th century colored xylograph in the Paris Musée Guimet, which we have already seen, depicts the Buddha in the center, touching the earth with his right hand, surrounded by Brahma and Indra, multiplying himself in seated positions, performing various mudras and accompanied by gods and monks. The earliest known depiction of Puranakashyapa committing suicide by jumping into a pond with a pot filled with sand hung from his neck, narrated in the Tibetan Mūlasravasthavādi Vinaya, is from the Kubyakugi Minakaba in Pagan, dated to the 11th century. Although the Tibetan Mūlasravasthavādi Vinaya and the Divyavadana state that those present saw the Blessed One adorned with 32 marks of a great man from afar, the iconography of visual representations alluding to the Twin Miracle, apart from the Ushnisha, Urna and the webbed fingers, do not include any other 32 marks. It is written that, quote, "Then Blessed One touched the earth with his hand, held in the gesture of allaying fear," meaning Abhemudra. "His fingers were webbed, his palm was marked with a wheel and an auspicious mark, swastika, arising as a result of many hundreds of lifetime merits." Quotation ends. There are no known Gandharan sculptures depicting the Buddha touching the earth during the Twin Miracle. However, there are few sculptures found in Begram Kapisi region in Afghanistan, where the Buddha, while performing the Twin Miracle, stands frontally, making the appropriate gesture of allaying fears, Abhemudra, with the palm held upwards and facing to the viewer. In some sculptures, his right palm is marked by a wheel, and in a very rare sculpture with a swastika. In all these sculptures, the Buddha's fingers are webbed. The Gandharan sculptors also do not attempt to depict the lotus flower on which the Buddha sits. According to the Tibetan Mūlasravasthavādi Vinaya, it was as large as a chariot wheel and made entirely of gold. Even the meditating Buddhas created by the Buddha himself, duplicating himself, are often shown seated on the seats of straw. Once again, in contrast, late Gupta and Dwarvati period sculptures depict the central figure of the Buddha seated on the lotus. The beautiful sculpture dated to the 10th or the 11th century, most likely from the Nalanda in Bihar, now in the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, depicts the Buddha performing the miracle seated on a large lotus. We are also certain that this sculpture represents, without a doubt, the miracle performed at Shravasti because of the mango tree, whose fruits hang from the branches depicted above the Buddha's Blessed One's head, and because of the presence of adoring King Prasannajit and the humiliated Puranakashyapa beneath the lotus flower. The mural depicting the miracle of Shravasti at Lokitepan in Pagan in Myanmar shows the Buddha seated on a large lotus in full bloom, with King Prasannajit to our left and defeated Puranakashyapa to our right. What do we know about the iconography of the Buddha's other major twin miracle at Kapilavastu? The Pali Nidhana Katha states that the miracle that the Siddhartha Gautama had to perform to appease the doubt of the gods was also repeated at Kapilavastu before the Shakyas, who are proud by nature and obstinate in their pride. The text relates that the Blessed One fell into an ecstasy based on superior knowledge and rose into the air as if shaking off the dust from his feet at them. The Nidhana Katha then says that Buddha performed this miracle like unto that double miracle at the foot of the Kadamba tree, mango tree. Here, the Nidhana Katha refers to the miracle performed by the Blessed One at the foot of the mango tree at Shravasti, described in the Dhammapadartha Katha that we have discussed earlier. As I argued earlier, a hitherto unknown text similar to in content to the Pali Nidhana Katha may also have inspired the early forms of Indian art. Once again, it is the north gateway or the Torana of the great Sanchitupa that brings light to the earliest known representation of the miracle performed at Kapilavastu. The text relays that the Blessed One rose into the air as shaking off the dust from his feet at the proud Shakyas. Although John Marshall and Alfred Fouché have correctly identified the lowest narrative panel carved on the inner face of the west pillar of the northern Torana as Buddha's visit to Kapilavastu, but they fail to see that it depicts the miracle performed by the Buddha. The Buddha is symbolized by the Nigroda tree, also known as the banyan tree or the Picus bengalensis, and the throne. The path above the Blessed One represents the walk the Buddha took to mesmerize his opponents. King Suddhodana under the Chhatra worships in Anjali Mudra his son, the now fully enlightened Buddha. As Nidhana Katha tells us, it was at this moment he says, quote, "Now seeing this miracle unseen before, I bow down at your feet. This is my third homage." End of the quotation. As John Marshall and Alfred Fouché have correctly seen, the panel on the front of the west pillar of the northern Torana depicts the Buddha under the Nigroda tree preaching to the Shakyas. As Nidhana Katha states, quote, "So the Blessed One, having compelled his relatives to bow down before him, descended from the sky after the miracle and sat down on the seat prepared for him. And when the Blessed One was seated, the assembly of his relatives yielded him preeminence, and all sat there with unity in their hearts." Quotation ends. Chronologically, perhaps after the Sanchi Stupa, the next depiction related to the miracle at Kapilavastu is one on a coping stone, Ushnisha, of the Amaravati Stupa, now in the British Museum. Next to the scene depicting a procession of men on horseback with foot soldiers and musicians approaching a stupa, the Buddha performs a miracle of leviation in front of the father, monks and proud Sakyas. Immediately after, we see the Buddha seated in front of a tree, most likely a Nigroda tree, making the same mudra with his right hand, preaching to his father, monks and Sakyas. How to interpret then the large sculptures found in the Kapisa region in the ancient Buddhist sites of Paitava, Karacha, Kamsarga and Shotarak? Their iconography is largely limited to the Buddha leviating with blazing, fire blazing from the upper part of the body and the water gushing from the lower half. We also see two meditating Buddhas with flames springing from the shoulders and surrounded by a Prabha Mandala, a circle of rays, two gods in Anjali Mudra kneeling at the feet of the Buddha, Brahma and Indra holding chatras above the head of the Buddha, Vajrapani holding the Vajra, the thunderbolt, the city goddess with the cornucopia, horn of abundance, and the two flanking winged lions. These motifs do not give a precise indication of the locality where the miracle was displayed. An exceptional sculpture, I'm extremely sorry for the photograph, this is the only photograph I can get because the sculpture was destroyed in the Kabul Museum in 1992. An exceptional sculpture found accidentally at Paitava in Afghanistan in 1965, identifiable as depicting the twin miracle, but featuring two hitherto unpublished scenes in the damaged periphery of the central figure, led Maurizio Taddei to claim that the stele represents the miracle performed at Kapilavastu rather than at Shravasti. To make a long story short, his argument is based on the scenes depicted on the protruding panel to the viewer's left. Taddei interprets the two protagonists of the upper frame as Mahaprajapati and Suddhodana offering homage to the Gautama Buddha. The lower frame represents for Taddei the meeting between Rahula and his father, the Buddha. As both events took place at Kapilavastu, when the Buddha returned to his hometown after his enlightenment, at the invitation of his father, the miracle depicted in the center refers to the Blessed One performed in Kapilavastu. In the absence of an alternative interpretation, I accept the hypothesis regarding the upper panel, but with all due respect to my late friend and scholar, I find it difficult to accept Taddei's suggestion regarding the iconography of the lower panel. There are, of course, several Gandharan reliefs depicting the meeting between Rahula and his father. In particular, there is one beautifully staging the episode of Yashodhara attempted to win her husband's heart, Buddha's heart, back with a magical spell concealed in a sweetmeat that she asks her son to offer to his father. The scenes in Ajanta caves numbers 17 and 19 are correctly identified by Maurizio Taddei, Monica Sin and Dieter Shingloff, depict Rahula with his mother, Yashodhara, interacting with the Buddha. Although Taddei's hypothesis cannot be completely ruled out in connection with these iconographies for the upper panel, it seems more logical to interpret the scene on the lower panel as the offering of dust to the Buddha by Jaya and Vijaya as described in Ashokavadana. Taddei is correct to assume that the missing symmetrical panel to the viewer's right may have had a depiction of the Dipankara Jataka. Given this assumption, the offering of dust is an apt choice for the panel on the opposite side of the central figure as shown in Gandharan reliefs from Begram Kapisi region. According to the narrative, the ascetic Megha venerates the Dipankara Buddha by offering a spray of lotuses and spreading his garments on the ground and wiping his feet of the exalted one with his hair. Seeing that Megha is gifted with great knowledge and well instructed, Dipankara Buddha proclaims that he will win the unpassed perfect enlightenment. The ascetic Megha is none other than the future Siddhartha, Gautama. Likewise, Gautama Buddha predicts that the boy who offers him handful of dust will be reborn as the Emperor Ashoka. In this way, as Taddei himself admits, there is a clear indication of lineage from Dipankara Buddha to ascetic Megha, future Gautama Buddha, and Gautama Buddha to Jaya, the future King Ashoka. Leaving this controversy aside, I am inclined to accept Tadei's hypothesis that the twin miracle that Shakyamuni performs on this sculpture may refer to that of Kapilavastu. I wish to argue that the sculpture recently discovered in Pakistan also features the twin miracle at Kapilavastu, and moreover is a striking representation of the landscape of Chakraval cosmology. Let us look at it closely at this new find. I first learned of this sculpture in 2020 from photographs sent to me by a Pakistani colleague who noted that the sculpture was found accidentally in the Swabi district. It was broken into several pieces as shown in the original photograph. Although I had the intention to go to Pakistan to investigate this discovery, the coronavirus pandemic kept me homebound. The same sculpture, with some restoration, then appeared in an online auction in 2021. A comparison of the photographs taken at the time of its discovery and the one published in the online auction shows that several fragments were lost in transit. For example, the water jets under the right foot of the standing Buddha, the white color frame, one of the two seated meditating Buddhas depicted at the top of the arch, red color frame, and the head of the standing Buddha to the right of the viewer in the second lower register, green color frame, are absent from the photographs published by the auction house. The Buddha in Abhay Mudra and performing the miracle of spouting water from his feet and shooting flames from the rest of his body hovers in the center of the reliefs. Flames emanate from the shoulders behind the halo and on each side of the body. This leviating image of the Buddha occupies almost 3/4 of the height of the relief. Bounded by a horizontal divide at the bottom, the world of Rakshas, the underworld, is symbolized by two mythical winged lions placed on either side of a Triton or a sea monster whose body consists of two long fish tails. The muscular monster holds the earth with his left hand and throws a bunch of flowers in the shape of a ball towards the Buddha displaying the miracle. This recalls the Triton holding a flower bowl engraved to the right of the Buddha's right knee on the Paitava stele. Similarly, one of the 6 water creatures emerging from the lotuses floating on the water of the pond that forms the lower border of the same site stele throws a bowl of flowers towards the Buddha. According to the Tibetan Mūlasravasthavādi Vinaya, at that moment, the great miracle, the Buddha was honored by gods, titans, human beings, divinities, nagas, yakshas, gandharvas, users of spell and mantras, and praiseworthy serpents. Above the underworld is the world of humans, or the Manushya Loka. To indicate that the miracle is taking place at Kapilavastu, the Buddha's family is depicted on our right. The absence of 6 heretics with Purana Kashyapa who hung their head out of shame as their guru, teacher, clearly shows that the locality is not Sravasti. Although the figures cannot be identified with certainty, the youth in Anjali Mudra, seated at the foot of the Buddha, is most likely Rahula. The young woman in a semi-kneeling position, comforting the youth by placing her hand on the youth's shoulder, is then his mother Yashodhara, who desperately tried to win back her husband's heart but eventually became a bhikshuni and attained arahatship. And the hallowed figure standing behind Yashodhara would be Suddhodana, the father of the Buddha. He also took refuge in the Buddha's teaching and attained arahatship. To the viewer's left, then are the proud Shakyas of Kapilavastu who contested the Buddhahood of the Suddhodana's son. A Brahmin with his ascetic attire asks forgiveness on his knees in Anjali Mudra. Leaving the world of Manushas, we then enter into the world of Bodhisattvas. On either side of the hovering figure of the Buddha are the two hallowed and lavishly dressed Bodhisattvas seated in Lalitasana with one foot resting on a stool and the right hand resting on the right knee. The one to our left holds a flower bowl and the one on our right holds a lotus flower. Each Bodhisattva is accompanied by two standing figures. All look with amazement at the Blessed One performing the miracle. The world of the Bodhisattvas continue directly above. On either side is a Bodhisattva seated under a pointed arch pavilion, resting on two columns surmounted by pseudo-Corinthian capitals. The turban and hallowed Bodhisattvas to the viewer's left sits with both hands embracing his left knee, with the left foot resting on a low stool. His gaze is turned towards the head of the Buddha. Although the head of the Bodhisattva on the viewer's right is damaged, the remaining figure is clearly a pensive mood, also akin to many seated images of Avalokiteshvara. Behind and above each Bodhisattva are two standing figures, the upper one in the balcony of the arch pavilion. Two long-tailed winged leonine monsters crawl upwards on either side of the trapezoidal arch framing the Buddha. Two half-kneeling female figures on either side of the Buddha's shoulders hold a garland in both hands. Needless to say, the two levels of Bodhisattva world reminds us of the Bodhisattva depicted on the reliefs related to the Mohammedanari sculpture, misinterpreted by some art historians as Miracle of Shravasti, beginning with Alfred Fouché. Fouché's interpretation is contested by many, notably John M. Rosenfield, John Huntington, Mauricio Tadei, Anna Maria Quagliotti, Paul Harrison, Kriston Lusanitz, and Monica Singh. As discussed elsewhere, I agree that it is more likely a depiction of the Amitabha in Sukhavati, flanked by Avalokiteshvara and other Bodhisattvas. Having clarified this issue, let us now move on to the uppermost register. Each of three Vidyadharas, or most probably Kinnaras, holds a garland directly above the head of the Buddha. The Divyabhadana relates that the Buddha was praised by gods, Nagas, Yakshas, antigods, heavenly birds, Kinnaras, and the great snakes when he was staying in the city of Rajagriha at the Bamboo Grove and at Jetanarama Monastery in Shravasti. To either side of the Kinnaras, a magically created Buddha sits in Dahani Mudra with flaming springing from the shoulders and surrounded by a flaming Prabha Mandala. The Buddha thus fulfills the twin miracle feat of multiplying himself. According to the Tibetan Mula Sravasthavadi Vinaya, a whole array of Buddhas were magically manifested all the way up to the highest heaven, Akanishta. Some Buddhas were blazing fire, some others were producing clear light, some were producing a shower of rain, while the others were producing lightning. In the corners of the uppermost level, 4 monks, or most probably Buddhas, each side, sit in meditation. They do not represent the duplication of magically created Buddhas because they lack flames or water jets. They could be monks, since they are depicted without halos. But the presence of meditating monks above the head of the Buddha performing the twin miracle is rather strange. They could be generic Buddhas or even independently awakened Pratyeka Buddhas or Paseka Buddhas. In Theravada Buddhism, the Pratyeka Buddhas have also awakened from the sleep of ignorance and have reached the end of compulsive circle of rebirths. Their dwelling place is Mount Gandhamadana. Situated in the North Himalayas, the Mount Gandhamadana is mentioned as their favorite place of residence. Having entered upon religious life the Paseka Bodhisattva, lives the life of an ascetic and dedicates himself to meditation practices. As Ria Kloppenberg argues, quote, most probably representations of Paseka Buddha were made, but they cannot be distinguished from those of monks unless an inscription shows them to be indeed images of Paseka Buddha. Quotation ends. As Peter Skilling argued, that these independently enlightened Buddhas can acquire the powers of leviation. The Tibetan Mūlasravasthavādi Vinaya relates that while the Buddha was performing the dual miracle, the intervening space between the human beings and the non-humans also became purified. Likewise, the layered structure of this newly discovered sculpture with its specific iconographic program vividly depicts the world of Rakshas, the world of Manushas, the world of Bodhisattvas, and probably the realm of Pratyeka Buddhas. Are we to consider the Buddha's twin miracle as Maya, magic or illusion, a fundamental concept in Hindu philosophy, particularly in the schools of Vedanta? Maya originally refers to the magical power with which a god can make human beings believe what turns out to be an illusion. The Yoga Maya, performed by Krishna, the eighth avatar of Vishnu and also supreme god of his own right, is perhaps one of the Mayas comparable to the miracle performed by Gautama Buddha. When Krishna performs Rasakrida, circle dance, with the gopis, in which he uses his divine Maya to replicate himself so that he dances between every other gopi in the circle. The Bhagavad Purana says, quote, then began the Rasa, festival dance, ornamented by the circle of gopis, along with the master of the yoga such that he was placed between each pair of them, hugging the neck of each of the women next to him. This attracts the gods and Gandharvas who assembled in the sky to watch and celebrate the amazing miracle. Having created as many as of himself, as there were cowherd men, gopis, the Lord, who in reality took delight only in himself in play, took delight with them. Quotation ends. This scene is repeated in some of the Vaishnava Puranas, as it is of one of Krishna's most well-known and delightful miracles accomplished through his Yoga Maya. The famous revelation of Krishna's universal form in the Bhagavad Gita, where he displays all the gods and other celestial beings in his body, as well as his flaming mouth and other body parts, especially, quote, Lord Krishna, the great Lord of mystic power of yoga, revealed his supreme majestic form to Arjuna. Arjuna saw the universal form of the Lord with many mouths and eyes and many marvelous visions with numerous divine ornaments, holding many divine weapons, wearing divine garlands and apparel, anointed with celestial perfumes and ointments, full of all wonders, the limitless God with faces on all sides. If the splendor of 1,000 suns were to blaze forth at once in the sky, even that would not resemble the splendor of the Exalted One. End of quotation. On seeing these manifestations of Supreme God, the terrified demons fled in all directions. Unlike Krishna only uses fire in his miracle, the Buddha uses both fire and its opposite element, water, recalling the powerful weapon of Indra, the god of gods, rain and storms. This reminds us of the war between Krishna, who helped Agni to burn Kandava forest, and Indra, who sent torrential rain to extinguish the fire, recounted in the epic Mahabharata. Thanks to Arjuna's Gandiva bow and the Krishna's Chakrayuda, Indra's army was defeated. But the Buddha uses these two opposing elements, fire and water, at Kapilavastu and Shravasti, humiliate the arrogant Shakyas and the 6 heretics led by Purana Kashyapa. Although these illusions, Maya, performed by Krishna are not depicted in earliest form of art, the Bhagavata cult of Vaishnavism in Gandharan region has a long history and appeared long before Shaivism. The discovery of 6 bilingual silver drums issued by the Indo-Greek king Agathocles, depicting the 2 divine brothers Balarama Samkarshana and Vasudeva Krishna, hidden in a pilgrim's water vessel in a room of the administrative quarter of the ancient city of Ai-Khanum in northern Afghanistan by French archaeologists on the 3rd of October 1970, revolutionized our knowledge of Vaishnavana image in northern India. John Filiosa correctly identified the divinity holding a musala, the pestle, and hala, the plough, as Samkarshana Balarama, and the one holding a chakra, the wheel, and a sankha, the conch shell, as Vasudeva Krishna. It is all the more interesting to note that these 2 divine brothers appear as early as the 3rd century BC on imperial Panchmark coins issued at the peak of Mauryan Empire. The sculptures of anthropomorphic Vishnu Narayana and zoomorphic Vishnu Varaha, and the 8-armed Vishnu holding a Sankha chakra dated to the 2nd or the 3rd century CE, paired with 2 bronze coins of Hovishka also found in Gandhara, clearly show that Vishnu and his 8th avatar Krishna were popular in this geographical zone. There can be no doubt that the Gandharan artists who executed the reliefs depicting the Buddha performed the miracle of multiplying himself, his own image, and heard the illusions or the Maya performed by Krishna. The difference is that Gandharan artists depict the miracle performed by Buddha convincingly, making the Buddha a better magician than Krishna, thus establishing the Blessed One, at least temporarily, as God above the Hindu gods. The stratified world symbolizing the Chakraval cosmology, denoting a world system, is represented in many Gandharan sculptures. One such theme is the Buddha descent from the heaven of the 33 gods. The Gandharan relief, preserved in the Asian Civilization Museum in Singapore, which I discussed elsewhere, is a good example. It clearly evokes the concept of the Chakravala cosmology with the 3 worlds, Trithimsa heaven, the world of Devas, symbolized by Indra, Brahma, and celestial beings, the world of men, indicated by Bhikshuni Utpalavarna, and the world of crawling creatures, Urga, Naga, Panangana, represented by Nagas and treasures and coin hoards. Perhaps the most evocative representation denoting a world system are found in the stupa from Buner. The layered registers of the stupa reflect the standard Indian view of the stratified world. This sequence represents the stratification from heaven downwards. The sky, the Deva, with meditating Buddhas under arches. The middle region, Gandharvas and Yakshas with Dionysian scenes. The standing earth creatures, Manushas, in 2 registers depicting the events related to the life of the historical Buddha and his previous lives. The crawling creatures, Urga, Naga, indicated by the undulating garlands. And finally, the subterranean creatures, Raksha, Asura, represented by lotus blossoms. These quick observations bring us back to the Swabi relief sculpture. Sculpture representing the twin miracle performed by Buddha, Blessed One, at the Kapilavastu. As the Dhammapada Atthakatha clearly says, quote, both flames of fire and stream of water shot upwards as far as the world of Brahma, and streamed thence to the rim of the Chakravala. Quotation ends. In this way, claims Divyavadana, quote, the Blessed One created an array of Buddhas rising up to the abode of the gods, Akanishta, such as that there was an entire assembly of Lord Buddhas, quotation ends. In classical Buddhist cosmology, Akanishta or Akanitta, meaning nothing higher, unsurpassed, is the highest of pure abodes and thus highest of all the realms. Maurizio Taddei draws a parallel between Gautama Buddha and the Dipankara Buddha, the latter being the sublime emanation of light that accompanies the prophecy of the ascetic Megha, deemed to be the future Buddha. Dipankara, literally one who uses light, Deepa, appears in front of the Bodhisattva, the future Buddha Gautama. As Gusipa Tucci, followed by Maurizio Taddei, point out, the emission of flames is declared in the Swarnaprabha Sutra to be the aspect of Buddhas assumed when they reveal themselves to the Bodhisattvas. A hitherto unpublished sculpture from Kapisa region seemed to capture this miraculous apparition witnessed by the ascetic Megha. It features the unprecedented iconography of the Dipankara Buddha emitting fire from his shoulders and twice multiplying his own seated image in the presence of the ascetic Megha, the future Gautama Buddha. As such, it is a forerunner of the Buddha in his last birth performing the twin miracle. Such is the case of the Buddhas preaching when the Shravakas have gone away, the Saddharma Pundarika, to a chosen audience of Bodhisattva, flown to him from four corners of the world. It was at this moment, as Saddharma Pundarika states, that, quote, the Buddha Shakyamuni emitted a ray of light from his top knot, Ushnisha, the mark of great person, and also from the tuft of white hair between his eyebrows, Udna, thus illuminating all the Buddha worlds in the east, equal to stands of hundreds and 8 myriads of kotis of Naityas of the Ganges river. Quotation ends. In conclusion, I wish to underline that it is this layered view of Chakwal cosmology that is so abundantly captured in this elaborate sculpture evocation of the twin miracle from the Swabi district of Pakistan. The composition of the new find compared to the other known Gandharan depictions of the theme is strikingly reminiscent of the stratified view of the Chakwal cosmology, a cosmology denoting world system or inhabited universe. By these miracles, O Mayas, the Buddha Gautama, who was none other than a Devati-Deva, God above gods, mesmerized his friends and opponents alike by demonstrating the magical power with which a God can make human beings believe what turns out to be an illusion, a Maya. I thank you very much.